I want you to picture something for me. You're standing in your closet at 6 in the morning, and you're reaching for a mug from the shelf, the blue one with the chip in the handle, because for 44 years that was his mug, and you'd hand it to him without looking, and your hand is already halfway through the motion before you remember there's nobody in the kitchen to hand it to. You stand there holding a coffee mug like it's the strangest object you've ever seen. And that's the moment, not the funeral, not the folded flag, not the casseroles from the neighbors. That mug is the moment you understand he is actually gone. I'm Diane. I'm 68 years old. 6 months after I buried my husband of 44 years, I sold my house in Delaware and moved alone to a small city in the Philippines I could not have found on a map a year earlier. My children thought I'd lost my mind with grief. My neighbors thought so too, and I'm going to tell you why they were wrong, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Harold and I met at a church potluck in 1978, in a town outside Wilmington called Newark, not the one people think of. He brought a lemon bar nobody wanted, and I brought a casserole nobody finished, and somehow we ended up talking for 2 hours by the coffee urn while our respective friends left without us. He was an electrician. I did payroll for a company that made industrial fasteners, the kind of job nobody at a party ever wants you to explain twice. We were married 44 years. We raised 2 children in a modest colonial on a street with big oak trees, the kind that drop so many leaves in October you're out there raking every single weekend and complaining about it and secretly loving it anyway. Our daughter Beth lives 40 minutes from where I grew up, married, 2 kids of her own. Our son Michael moved out to Colorado for work and stayed for the mountains. Harold had a bad heart for the last 6 years of his life, the kind you manage with pills and appointments and a certain low hum of worry you learn to live inside of. We knew, in the way you know something without letting yourself know it, that we were on borrowed time, but knowing it in the abstract and living through the actual Tuesday morning when it happens are 2 entirely different things. He went in his sleep, next to me, and I woke up at 5 a.m., the way I always did, and he simply wasn't waking up with me. 44 years, and the ending of it took no time at all. The first few months after, I don't remember clearly, and I've stopped apologizing to myself for that. I know Beth stayed with me for the first 2 weeks. I know the house filled up with flowers that all died at the same time, which felt like it meant something, though I couldn't tell you what. I know I kept setting 2 places at the table out of habit, and then quietly clearing one away before I sat down. Every single night, like a small private ceremony nobody else witnessed. Michael flew in for the funeral and had to fly back out 4 days later, and I understood. I really did. He has a job and a family of his own. But watching him go through airport security, watching him become a small figure and then no figure at all, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel, which was that I was now, for the first time since 1978, entirely alone in a house built for a family of 4. Beth called every single day for the first 2 months. Every day, same time, 6 o'clock, right after she'd get the kids settled with homework. I loved those calls and I dreaded them in equal measure, because half the time she'd ask how I was doing, and I'd say fine, and we both knew it was a lie, and neither of us knew what to do with a lie that polite and that necessary. About 4 months in, my next-door neighbor, Carol Ann, who'd known me 22 years, said something to me over the fence that I've never forgotten. She said, "Diane, honey, you're doing everything right, and you still look like you're waiting for a bus that already left." I didn't have an answer for that. I went inside and I cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry yet, not even at the funeral. It was around then that my sister-in-law, Harold's younger sister Pat, mentioned almost in passing that her friend's mother had moved to somewhere in Asia after her own husband passed. Pat didn't remember the country, just that it was cheap and warm, and the woman seemed, in Pat's words, shockingly fine. I didn't think much of it at the time, but that phrase stuck to me the way certain phrases do. Uninvited, shockingly fine. I started looking things up late at night, the way you do when you can't sleep, and don't want to lie there listening to a house that's too quiet. I don't even remember how I landed on the Philippines specifically. I think it started with a YouTube video that auto-played after something else. A woman about my age, sitting on a balcony somewhere with palm trees behind her, talking about her life in a city called Dumaguete. I watched the whole thing. Then I watched another. Then it was 1 in the morning, and I'd watched 11 of them. I did that quietly for about 3 months. I didn't tell Beth. I didn't tell Michael. I certainly didn't tell Carol Ann, who I loved dearly but who would have had opinions before I'd finished my sentence. I read expat forums. I joined a Facebook group for women over 60 living abroad. I asked the kind of practical questions a payroll clerk of 30 years asks. What does healthcare actually cost? What happens if you break a hip? What's the visa situation? Is it safe for a woman alone? The answers varied, same as they always do. But there was a common thread among the women who'd actually done it and stayed. They all said some version of the same thing. It was hard for the first few months, and then it wasn't. And then they couldn't imagine having stayed where they were. Around month 5, I did something that surprised even me. I booked a 2-week trip. Just a trip, I told myself. I'd see it with my own eyes. And if it was wrong for me, I'd come home and never mention it again. I told Beth I was taking a trip to clear my head, and when she asked where, I said Southeast Asia, in the vague way you say something when you're not ready for the follow-up questions. She got quiet on the phone. Mom, alone? I told her I was a grown woman who'd managed a household and 2 children and a full-time job for 4 decades, and I thought I could manage an airport. She laughed, a little, which was the first time I'd heard her laugh in months, and that alone almost made the whole trip worth it, before I'd even packed a bag. I flew out of Philadelphia in October, connecting through Seoul, landing in Manila after nearly 20 hours of travel, stiff and disoriented, and wondering, somewhere over the Pacific, what exactly I thought I was doing. Then the doors of the airport opened onto air so warm and thick, it felt like a hand pressed gently against my whole body. And something in me, some clenched muscle I didn't know I'd been holding since the funeral, let go just slightly. I spent 3 days in Manila, overwhelmed in the way any first-timer is, and then I flew down to Dumaguete, because that was the city from all those late-night videos. It's smaller than Manila, sits right on the water, has a university, Silliman, that gives the whole town an easy, unhurried energy. I'd booked a small apartment for the 2 weeks through a woman I'd found in that Facebook group, an American named Susan who'd lived there 11 years and, as it turned out, met arriving flights personally for women traveling alone, no charge, just because someone had done the same for her once. Susan was 71, sharp as anything, widowed herself. She picked me up at the airport with a sign that said, Diane in marker, like I was someone important. And on the drive into town, she said something I still think about. She said, the first 2 weeks, you're a tourist. The first 2 months, you're lonely. After that, you're just a person living her life, same as anybody. Most women don't stay long enough to find out. I didn't know yet whether I'd be one of the ones who stayed. I walked along the boulevard that first evening. The whole town seemed to be out there with me. Families, students, old men playing checkers on a folding table, a woman selling something sweet and warm out of a covered pot who called me ma'am with a smile that felt like an actual welcome, not a transaction. A group of teenage girls asked, giggling, if they could practice their English on me, and we talked for 20 minutes about nothing at all, and I realized somewhere in that conversation that I hadn't thought about the empty chair at my kitchen table once since I'd landed. I met a woman named Grace, who ran a little cafe near the market, in her 50s, widowed too. Her husband lost to a boating accident years back. She didn't know my story, and I didn't know hers, not yet. But there was something in how she looked at me over the counter, like she recognized the specific weight I was carrying, without my having to explain it. By my third visit, she'd started making my coffee before I ordered it. By the end of those 2 weeks, I had a decision sitting in my chest that I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet. I flew home to Delaware, and for 11 days I said nothing to anyone. I made lists at my kitchen table, the same table with the chair I still hadn't moved. Pros, cons, what I'd be leaving, what I'd be walking toward. And underneath all of it, one plain fact I kept coming back to. In that house, I was Harold's widow. In Dumaguete, for 2 weeks, I had just been Diane. I called a realtor on a Monday morning in November. Beth found out when she stopped by to drop off a casserole, the way she still did every couple of weeks, and saw the sign go up in the yard while she was still in the driveway. She came inside and sat down across from me at that same kitchen table. And she didn't yell. Beth's never been a yeller, but her voice got very careful, the way it does when she's trying hard not to cry. "Mom, is this about Dad? Are you running from something?" I told her the truth, which was that I didn't fully know yet, that I only knew the house had started to feel like a museum I was living inside of, and I didn't want to spend however many years I had left dusting the same exhibits. Michael's reaction, when Beth called him, was worse in a different way. He called me directly, and his voice had an edge I'd rarely heard from him. "Mom, you're 68. You don't know anybody there. What happens if you get sick? What happens if something happens to you and we're 14 time zones away?" I understood every bit of that fear, because it was the same fear I'd have had if one of them had told me the same thing at my age. I told them both what I'd learned, that I'd have health insurance that covered me internationally, that I'd already made 2 friends there, women my own age who'd done exactly this and thrived, that the cost of a hospital stay, should I need one, would likely be a fraction of what it would cost with my Medicare gap coverage back home. But they didn't want information. They wanted their mother to stay put, in the house, in the chair, in the life that at least made sense to them, even if it no longer made sense to me. The conversation ended without resolution, the way these things often do. Not with anger exactly, but with a heaviness that sat in the room after they'd both gone quiet. Beth hugged me before she left, tightly, and said, "I just don't want to lose you too, Mom." That one landed somewhere very deep, and I sat with it for days, before I let myself keep moving forward anyway. I sold the house in February. I kept Harold's watch, our wedding photos, and surprisingly little else, though I shipped his old recliner to Beth's garage because neither of us could bring ourselves to let it go to strangers. I said goodbye to Carol Ann over the fence one last time, and she cried more than I did, which somehow made it easier. The flight back to Dumaguete in March felt entirely different from the one in October. That first trip, I'd been a tourist testing an idea. This time, I had 2 suitcases and no return ticket, and about 6 hours into a 19-hour trip with a layover in Seoul, sitting alone in an airport chair at 2 in the morning local time, I had the distinct and frightening thought that I had just made the single largest decision of my adult life without either of my children's blessing. Susan met me at the airport again. Same sign, same marker. And when she saw my face, she just said, "First few weeks are the hardest. Then it gets easier. I promise you that." I believed her the same way I'd believed the nurses and doctors in my life, who'd told me hard truths gently. Not because I had proof, but because there was nothing false in her voice. Those first weeks were, honestly, difficult in ways the 2-week trip hadn't prepared me for. A vacation and a life are not the same animal. I had to learn how to open a local bank account, how the jeepneys worked, how to grocery shop in a market where half the labels were in a language I didn't read. I had days where I sat in my small rented apartment and cried, not from unhappiness exactly, but from the sheer exhaustion of rebuilding a life from nothing at 68 years old. But I also had Grace, who by the second week had simply started including me in her Sunday family lunches without asking, the way you'd include a cousin, not a customer. I had Susan, who took me to her own doctor and sat with me through the whole appointment, translating not language but simply the unfamiliar rhythm of a new healthcare system. I had my landlady, a widow herself named Corazon, 62, who knocked on my door the second week with a plate of pancit and said only, "You looked sad yesterday. Eat first." By the 2-month mark, something had shifted, quietly, the way real change usually does. I woke up one Tuesday and realized I had not thought about the mug, the closet, the empty chair, in nearly a week. I felt a small stab of guilt about that, and then Grace, when I mentioned it to her over coffee, said something I've carried with me since. Grief doesn't need you to suffer to prove you loved him, it just needs you to keep living. I started volunteering twice a week at a small literacy program for adults near the market, helping men and women my age and younger learn to read and write in English, a skill many of them needed for work abroad. I found, to my own surprise, that I was good at it. Patient in a way 30 years of managing payroll disputes had apparently prepared me for, without my knowing it. About 7 months in, I had a small health scare of my own, chest pains that turned out to be nothing more than stress and a poor night's sleep. But it sent me to a private hospital in the city for the whole visit, an EKG, blood work, a consultation with an internist who spoke perfect English and spent a genuinely unhurried 20 minutes with me, came to just under 2,000 pesos, about $35. I called Beth that evening and told her the whole story, unscared, unhidden, the way I'd promised myself I would from now on. There was a long pause on her end. "Mom, that's it? $35? That's it," I told her. And for the first time, I heard something in her voice that wasn't quite worry. It sounded almost like relief. Beth came to visit 5 months after I'd settled in, staying for 10 days, and I watched something in her unclench day by day, the way it had in me months earlier. She met Grace. She met Susan. She sat in on one of my literacy classes and cried afterward, quietly, in the back of a tricycle, when a woman I'd been teaching thanked her in halting English for having a mother who cared enough to help strangers learn. On her last night, sitting on the small balcony of my apartment, Beth said, "I thought you were running from Dad's memory." I told her I thought so too at first. "And now?" she asked. "Now," I told her, "I think I was running toward whatever was left of me underneath being somebody's wife for 44 years. She was quiet a long while, and then she said, very softly, "I think Dad would like it here." That undid me more than almost anything else had in the entire year. Michael visited 4 months after that, more skeptical going in, the way he'd always been the harder one to convince. He asked practical questions, the same ones he'd asked over the phone. Insurance, finances, what happens if I need serious care as I get older? I had real answers this time, not hopeful guesses. And by the end of his visit he admitted, a little reluctantly, that I'd clearly thought it through far more carefully than he'd given me credit for. "I still worry," he told me at the airport, "but I worry less." I told him that was really all I could ask of any of us. It's been just over 2 years now since that first 2-week trip, since Susan held up a sign with my name on it at an airport where I knew not one other living soul. My children don't call out of obligation or fear anymore. They call because they want to know what I've been cooking, which local dish I've finally mastered, how the literacy class is going, whether Grace's youngest daughter got into the university she wanted. I still keep Harold's watch on my nightstand, and some mornings I still reach for a mug that isn't there. Grief doesn't leave just because you've moved somewhere warm, but it doesn't have to be the only room you live in anymore either. I wake up most mornings now in a modest apartment 2 blocks from the water. I make my coffee. I sit for a while and watch the town wake up around me. The same folding checkers table, the same woman with her warm, sweet snacks, families out for their morning walk. And I think, most days, about how close I came to spending however many years I had left, setting 2 places at a table and clearing one away in silence, in a house that had become a museum to a life that was over. I'm 68 years old, and I am, in Susan's words from that very first car ride, just a person living her life now, same as anybody. If you're sitting where I sat, in a too quiet house, setting a place out of habit for someone who won't be joining you, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I will tell you that grief and a life aren't opposites. You're allowed to carry one while you build the other. There's a book I came across after I'd already found my footing, called The Long Goodbye and What Comes After, written by a grief counselor who also happens to work with a lot of widows, considering exactly this kind of move. It covers the practical side, visas, healthcare, finances, alongside the emotional side, which is the part most people forget to plan for. I don't get anything for mentioning it. I just wish I'd had it in that first month, instead of finding my own way through by instinct, and a great deal of luck. There's a link in the description, if it's useful to you. If this story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you'd like it, and subscribe if you'd like to hear more. Thank you for sitting with me a while.